When an 11-year-old girl stumbled into the hospital lobby late on a stormy night, barefoot and shaking, her first words sent shivers down Nurse Emily Carter's spine. What appeared to be a simple case of a lost child soon unraveled into a sinister reality, threatening lives and exposing a hidden crime. This is a story of hidden crimes, unwavering courage, and a relentless fight for justice. Let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe truth must prevail, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Emily Carter never forgot the smell of rain mingling with the sterile tang of disinfectant in the hospital's corridor that night. She had been preparing to wrap up her shift, scribbling some notes on the day's patient charts, when she noticed a small figure lingering by the automatic doors. Usually, visitors braved the storm only for emergencies. A child, alone and huddled in the far corner of the lobby, was unheard of. Emily glanced around, expecting to see frantic parents racing in behind the girl, but no one followed. The automatic doors slid open and shut on the same gust of wind, revealing no one else outside. Emily shut her binder and approached. The girl's feet were caked in mud, her hair plastered to her head by the downpour she must have endured, and she clutched a tattered stuffed rabbit in her trembling arms. The lines of the girl's face, pale and streaked with tears, told a story of fear. Before Emily could say anything, the child whispered in a voice barely audible over the hum of the flickering fluorescent lights, "They have my brother." Those 4 words, drifting up from the pit of fear in the child's soul, reached directly into Emily's chest and squeezed. She had no idea who they might be, but she recognized the raw terror in the girl's gaze. Emily quickly shrugged off her sweater and draped it around the girl's shoulders, guiding her farther into the warm glow of the hospital lights. She knelt down, tried to meet the girl at eye level, and asked as gently as possible, "What's your name, sweetie?" For a moment, the girl seemed bewildered by the question. She looked down at the stuffed rabbit as if searching for an answer. I don't know," she said at last, voice cracking. "They changed my name a lot." Alarm signals shot through Emily's mind. Children who came from troubled homes sometimes struggled with basic recall if they'd been traumatized. But this seemed different, darker, more deliberate. "It's all right," Emily said. "Can you tell me anything else about yourself? Where you live, who your parents are?" The girl's hands curled tightly around the rabbit. "They told me not to talk about it," she breathed, barely audible. "They said if I did, they would hurt my brother. But they're going to take him away, forever." Emily felt her pulse racing. She glanced around the empty lobby, half expecting some shadowy figure to burst in and snatch the child away at any second. "Come," she urged. "You're safe now. Let's get you warmed up." She gently guided the girl toward one of the private triage rooms. Inside, the overhead light revealed the full extent of the girl's disheveled state. Her bare feet were bruised. Scratches marred her arms, visible through the short sleeves of a ragged t-shirt. Stains and dirt clung to her clothing. Emily's professional instincts pushed her to check for any injuries. The girl allowed herself to be placed on the examination bed, though she kept that stuffed bunny clutched in her lap. Emily tried to reassure her, "I'm going to call someone who can help. Is that okay?" The child nodded, though fear still swirled in her eyes. Emily stepped out and dialed the number of Detective Mark Evans, a contact she had in the local police department. They had met 6 months before, when a battered teenage runaway had been brought to the hospital under suspicious circumstances. Emily had rung the detective then because she suspected foul play, and Mark Evans's investigations had proven that the teen's injuries were indeed tied to a criminal ring. Emily had a gut feeling that tonight's situation was equally, if not more, severe. When he picked up, there was a note of surprise in his voice. "Emily? It's nearly midnight. Is everything all right?" "I have a girl here, maybe 11 or so," Emily said, struggling to contain the urgency in her words. "No ID, no shoes, and she claims someone has her brother. She's terrified, Mark. There's something more going on." Detective Evans's tone shifted, turning serious and professional. "Where are you right now?" "St. Mercy's, Triage Room 3. I'm alone with her at the moment." "I'll be right there," he said. Emily ended the call and closed her eyes for a moment, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Then she returned to the girl's side. Gently, she asked again, "Honey, do you remember anything at all? Your brother's name?" The girl shook her head, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "They gave him a different name too, I think. But I called him Danny. That's what we used to call him, I'm sure. We have to help him before they move him." "Before they move him?" Emily repeated. "Where are they moving him to?" A look of horror twisted the child's features. "Somewhere far away. I heard them talking. They said, 'He's next to go.'" Emily felt a chill down her spine, as if a cold wind blew through the room. She realized that the dryness in her throat had nothing to do with the stale hospital air and everything to do with pure dread. She set a cup of water beside the child and tried to speak calmly. "All right, we're going to figure this out." The girl glanced around, her gaze landing on the walls, the door, the closed blinds, as if she were searching for hidden watchers. Then, with a trembling finger, she pointed to a faint marking on her left forearm. It resembled a tattoo, faded but still there, a string of numbers that made no immediate sense to Emily. "They put this on me," the girl whispered. "Said it would make sure I stayed in the system." Emily felt her breath catch. This wasn't just a child who ran away from a bad home. This was something far more sinister. She had heard rumors, dark allegations that children could be tagged or tattooed by traffickers, treated like products. Those rumors were the stuff of nightmares, and she had never quite believed them. Seeing that coded ink on this fragile child's arm brought every dreadful rumor to life. She forced herself to remain composed. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "You're safe here. I promise." Detective Mark Evans arrived shortly after, wearing a rumpled jacket over a shirt that looked like he had just thrown it on. His dark hair was damp from the rain, and concern etched deep lines into his face. Emily led him aside and whispered the details: the child's mysterious appearance, her claim of a stolen brother, the numbered tattoo on her arm. Mark took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, rubbing the stubble on his chin. "I've seen something like this before, though not often. We had a big case, child trafficking ring. Those monsters tag kids to keep them in line, like property. But I need more to go on. Right now, we don't even have a name for her." Emily's eyes flickered toward the closed triage door. She said they changed her name repeatedly. She doesn't know who to trust, and she's obviously terrified. Mark nodded. "I'll talk to her." He paused. "You said she mentioned a place with numbers?" "Yes, but she was so scared. She mentioned the place with the numbers and that someone is about to take her brother away forever." "It sounds like an active threat, Mark. Time sensitive. Let me see what I can find out." When he stepped inside, the girl stiffened at first. Emily stood by her side, offering a reassuring hand. Mark introduced himself in the gentlest voice Emily had ever heard from him. "I'm here to help," he said, kneeling so he was on the same level as the child. "I'm a detective. Could you tell me anything about the people who took you?" The girl hesitated, looking between him and Emily as though she were trying to gauge if they were truly safe. At length she whispered, "They're men, mostly. But there's a woman too, a doctor. She wore a white coat. She was in charge. She said if we made trouble, we'd pay for it." "A doctor? In a white coat?" Emily's thoughts raced. The hospital was full of doctors, many wearing white coats. She tried to keep her face calm, not wanting to alarm the child, but her gut churned as she thought about the staff in this very building. Then she mentally admonished herself, that was paranoid. There were countless doctors in the city, not just here in this hospital. Mark asked gently, "Do you know where this place was? Did you see a name on the building, or maybe a sign on the road?" The girl gripped the stuffed rabbit like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. "I'm not sure. There were big fences. And I saw a sign once. It had numbers on it, like N3 or something like that. I just remember the cold floors and the big halls. They gave me shots sometimes. Told me it was to keep me healthy, but it made me sleepy." Emily watched Mark's expression darken. In his line of work, he had undoubtedly heard worse, but it never stopped hurting to know such cruelty existed. "Okay," he said quietly. "You did a really brave thing coming here. We're going to keep you safe. Is there anything else you can remember?" Something that might help me find your brother faster? Tears welled in the girl's eyes. He's just a little boy. 8 years old, maybe. I don't remember how old I am, really. They never had a birthday for us or anything. Please, you have to save him. Mark touched the edge of the bed, his voice thick with empathy. I promise I'll do everything I can. Emily's phone buzzed then, startling her. She glanced at the screen and saw the number of Dr. Karen Aldridge, the hospital's top administrator. Dr. Aldridge had occasionally been involved in philanthropic work related to child welfare, though her demeanor often left Emily uneasy. She was pragmatic to the point of coldness, always reminding staff to stay in their lane and let her handle bigger issues. Emily answered the call quietly in the corner of the room. Yes, Dr. Aldridge? There was a faint echo, then the doctor's crisp tone. Nurse Carter, I understand you have taken in a stray child? One who came in unaccompanied? I'd like to remind you of protocol. Whenever a minor arrives in such a condition, the case should be reported to the hospital administration at once. All decisions about the child's care should come through me or the assigned social services representative. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. She had seen the hospital's official policy on minors, but this felt different. I informed security and called in a detective, she said calmly. This child seems to be in immediate danger. Dr. Aldridge's voice tightened. I see. Well, keep me updated. I will be in shortly. But I advise caution, Nurse Carter. Sometimes these children fabricate wild tales. You wouldn't want to jump to conclusions that might harm your career. Emily ended the call, her stomach knotting. Had Dr. Aldridge just threatened her job? The thought seemed paranoid, but she had heard that tone in the doctor's voice before. She turned back to Mark, who was watching her with raised eyebrows. Emily relayed the conversation quietly. Mark frowned. Interesting that the administrator is calling about this right away, especially in the middle of the night. Usually, they'd let the emergency protocols play out and handle it in the morning. Emily nodded. It's strange. I never see Dr. Aldridge come in unless it's a huge crisis. Usually, we'd pass these details to Child Protective Services and let them handle it. She must have heard about the child the moment she arrived. They both glanced at the girl, who was now sipping water and staring at a blank spot on the wall as though haunted by memories. Mark said, I'll call in a few favors. There's a detective in my department who specializes in missing children, but the tricky part here is that we don't have an official record. No name, no missing persons report. It's like she doesn't exist. The mention that she doesn't exist chilled Emily to the core. She had never thought it possible that someone could be systematically erased. But in her time as a nurse, she'd seen glimpses of horrors that told her not to dismiss the possibility. Humans sold as commodities. Children from broken or non-existent family ties, lost in the system, perfect for exploitation. Emily spent the next hour tending to the girl's medical needs. She found bruising along the child's wrists that suggested restraints. There were also needle marks that could have come from repeated injections. Emily dressed the cuts on the girl's feet and gave her a pair of clean socks from the supply cabinet. The entire time, the girl refused to release her stuffed rabbit, except for a moment when Emily needed to check her vitals. In that moment, Emily saw something embroidered on the rabbit's left ear, a name or a word that had been partially torn. All that remained was "duh," possibly short for Daisy or Darla, or maybe even Danny. It was uncertain. At about 3 in the morning, Dr. Karen Aldridge arrived in a crisp pantsuit, carrying a black briefcase. Her hair was perfectly styled, as though she had come straight from an important meeting rather than out of bed. She locked eyes with Emily immediately and gave a polite but tight smile. Mark introduced himself, and Dr. Aldridge arched a brow. Detective Evans, is it? Do we really need police presence here? This could be a simple case of a runaway child. Mark folded his arms. She claimed someone has her brother and that they threaten to move him by tomorrow. This is time-sensitive, Dr. Aldridge. The administrator waved a hand dismissively. Yes, children's imaginations. Still, if she's truly in danger, let's follow the correct channels. I've reached out to a social worker who's on call. They should be here soon to evaluate the child and handle her placement. Emily wanted to speak up, to say that a standard social worker might not be prepared for the scale of the threat the girl had described, but Dr. Aldridge's demeanor was that of someone who expected absolute compliance. She gave Emily another smile, one that never touched her eyes. "Nurse Carter, you've been very thorough, I'm sure. I'll take it from here." Emily felt Mark's hand touch her elbow lightly, as though telling her to keep calm. His eyes said it all. They still needed Dr. Aldridge's cooperation to proceed. For now, they would play along. Before leaving the triage room, Dr. Aldridge turned back to the girl, scanning her with an unsettling, clinical gaze. "How old are you, sweetie?" she asked, voice sugary. The child shrank back, pressing against Emily's side. She said nothing. Dr. Aldridge eyed the girl's arm. "Quite a nasty bruise. Best you keep her in bed. I'll speak to the social worker, and we'll see about next steps. Good night." With that, the doctor left, her heels clicking on the linoleum. Once she was gone, the girl exhaled a shaky breath. "I don't like her," she whispered to Emily. Emily exchanged a worried glance with Mark. Something in Dr. Aldridge's manner set them both on edge. Mark cleared his throat. "I'm going to do a more thorough check. I'll see if I can track any existing cases with that kind of numeric tattoo. We might have to widen the search beyond our county. If this is some big operation, they might have children from multiple places. Meanwhile, you keep a close eye on her, Emily." Emily nodded. "I will. Let me know if you find anything." For the rest of the night, Emily sat with the girl, letting her drift in and out of a light doze. The rain hammered on the windows, and in the distance thunder rolled. Each crash of thunder made the child jerk awake, her eyes wild and afraid. Emily soothed her gently, feeling her own heart ache with each tremor of fear that rippled through the girl. When the sun finally rose, pale and wan through the storm clouds, Emily could scarcely believe that so many hours had passed. She was exhausted, but she told herself that the adrenaline of the situation would keep her going. She had to see this through. The girl needed her. Morning staff trickled in, and Emily asked a colleague to cover her usual duties so she could remain by the child's side. Although the hospital had standard protocols for minors in crisis, something told Emily that typical procedure would not suffice. Mark returned mid-morning, bearing a sheaf of papers. He took Emily aside. "I searched our databases for any child with that numeric tattoo or a partial match to the pattern. Nothing came up in the city's records. But I expanded to some cross-state data, and I found references to an FBI alert from 2 years ago. They'd identified a string of incidents where children in the foster system disappeared without a trace. In at least 1 or 2 cases, children were recovered with coded tattoos or branding, part of a suspected trafficking ring. But the suspects behind it were never caught." Emily clenched her fists. "So you think she's one of those children?" "It's possible. The system might have lost track of them if these kids were flagged as runaways or if their files were tampered with. The only thing we do know is that these criminals have a pattern. They rename the children, move them around, and then sell them off. If that's the case, this girl's brother is in imminent danger." Emily's stomach churned. "We have to move fast," she said. "She told me they might transfer him in the next day." Mark nodded. "I'm trying to get a warrant to check some addresses that might tie into old leads. But this is all very hush-hush. We don't want to tip off the traffickers. Right now, I only have enough to suspect. I need real evidence or at least the child's testimony. But she's too traumatized to say much." Emily glanced at the triage room door, beyond which the girl lay dozing. "I'll see if she's ready to talk more. But we need to be careful, we don't want to push her too hard." Just as they were about to step inside, Dr. Aldridge returned with a stately older woman in tow. The woman introduced herself as Margaret Hill, a social worker who specialized in emergency child placement. She had a calm presence about her, but her eyes were guarded. "Let's see if we can get the child's story," she said. Emily noticed the girl's fear spike when Margaret Hill tried to question her. The child's responses were halting, disjointed. When Margaret asked about her parents, the girl only sobbed, "I don't have any. He was the only family I had left," presumably referencing the brother. Every time Margaret pressed for the identity of the people who held her captive, the girl would clamp her lips shut, shaking her head as though the memory itself hurt. Finally, Margaret backed off, glancing toward Dr. Aldridge and Mark. "She needs time to feel safe," the social worker said softly. Dr. Aldridge's phone chimed with a text, and she glanced at it quickly. "Yes, well, let's transfer her to a private unit in the pediatrics ward. She'll remain under observation. I assume there's no medical reason to keep her in triage." Emily hesitated but shook her head. "No, physically she's stable enough for a regular bed. But I'd prefer to keep an eye on her. She's frightened." Dr. Aldridge offered a dismissive nod. "Very well, Nurse Carter. Do whatever you think best, within reason." She turned on her heel and strode out. Emily watched her leave, heart pounding with suspicion. That phone chime had triggered an immediate departure, like Dr. Aldridge had urgent matters to attend to. And the way she had introduced Margaret Hill, as though the social worker were the final word in everything, left Emily uneasy. She suspected the hospital administration wanted to box this case into a neat little corner of the system, out of sight. Margaret Hill, for her part, seemed genuinely concerned. She gently patted the girl's arm and assured her that she would find a safe place. But Emily feared that if the child ended up in a standard system arrangement, she might vanish again. If the traffickers had resources to tamper with records, they might track her down. Over the next several hours, Emily arranged for a private room in the pediatric ward, making sure to place the girl close to the nurse's station. She wanted eyes on that door at all times, just in case. Mark came and went, making calls to various people, trying to gather enough evidence to launch an investigation. The tension at the hospital felt like an electric charge in the air, especially with Dr. Aldridge making repeated appearances on the ward, her eyes scanning everything with a hawk-like vigilance. Mid-afternoon, Emily was in the child's room, helping her settle into bed, when the girl abruptly looked at her arm. "I can't get it off," she said, referring to the tattoo. "I used soap, but it won't come off." Emily swallowed a lump in her throat. She reached out and gently touched the edges of the faded ink. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know you must hate it." Tears welled up in the girl's eyes. "They said we belonged to them, that they could do whatever they wanted with us. Nobody would care." "That's not true," Emily said firmly, stroking the child's hair. "Here, Detective Evans cares. We're going to make sure you and your brother are safe." The girl sniffled. "Emily, that's your name, right?" Emily smiled softly. "Yes, Emily Carter." "If you find him," the girl started, then paused. "If you find my brother, you won't let them take us again? You promise?" Emily felt the full weight of that promise settle on her shoulders. "I promise," she said, though a part of her trembled at the enormity of it all. She was just a nurse, not a police officer or a judge. But she would do everything she could, that much she knew. At around 5 p.m., the tension escalated. Mark, looking worn down and grim, returned to the hospital. He spoke to Emily in hushed tones near the pediatric ward entrance. "Bad news," he said. "I tried to talk to some higher-ups about the lead we have. They say there's no official report, no missing kid. Without a name or a documented abduction, they won't allocate the resources I need. I'm hitting walls. Everyone's telling me I'm chasing a phantom." Emily's voice shook with frustration. "She's right here, Mark. She's real, she's traumatized, and she's telling us that her brother is in danger." "I know." His jaw clenched. "I'm going to keep pushing. But the clock is ticking. If these traffickers are about to move him, we have less than a day to figure out where. Once he's gone, it might be nearly impossible to track him." The sense of urgency weighed on them like lead. Emily thought of that terrified boy, out there somewhere in the clutches of monsters. "Can't we question the girl again? Maybe if we approach it differently, she can remember something, anything that could help." Mark nodded. "But we have to do it delicately. We don't want to re-traumatize her." They returned to the girl's room. She was awake, picking at the sheets, her expression vacant. Emily sat by her bedside. Mark stood at a small distance, arms crossed softly, trying not to seem intimidating. The girl looked up at Emily, her eyes shimmering with tears. "He's scared too," she said. "He never talks much to anyone, except me. I think he's giving up." Emily's voice broke with compassion. Can you tell me about the place they kept you? Was it near a highway? Did you see a sign with a city name when you escaped? The girl took a shuddering breath. It was raining then too. There were big trucks passing by, I heard them. One had a symbol on it, an eagle maybe? I think it was a shipping company. The fence was tall, with barbed wire. And there was a metal gate with numbers. 704? 709? I don't remember. I just ran. Mark exchanged a glance with Emily. He scribbled these details in a small notebook. This is good, he said softly. We can use this. It's not enough, the girl whispered, hugging the rabbit. They said if I left, they'd punish him. I left anyway. Emily's heart broke at the guilt evident in the child's eyes. She placed a hand over the girl's small one. You did the right thing. Now we have a chance to rescue him. The girl lowered her gaze. I told them I wouldn't say anything if they let him go. But they lied. They never keep their word. Mark's phone buzzed. He walked into the hallway to answer, leaving Emily alone with the child. Emily could hear the detective's muffled voice as he spoke, but not the words. She tried to distract the girl by asking about her favorite things, if she liked any particular cartoon or if she remembered a favorite flavor of ice cream. The child seemed confused by such simple questions, as though she'd never even considered having favorites. I like rabbits, she said, stroking the ear of her stuffed toy. And Danny liked airplanes. She gave a quivering smile. He said one day we'd get on a plane and fly far, far away. Something caught in Emily's throat. Imagining these two children daydreaming about an escape from a place that treated them like disposable assets was almost too much to bear. She was grateful when Mark stepped back in. His expression was cautious but had a spark of hope. He sat down. I have a friend in the state police who might be able to help us get a warrant, but only if we have a more concrete lead. The detail about the fence with numbers could be crucial, but we need the exact location. The girl swallowed, her Adam's apple bobbing. I don't know if I can remember. She closed her eyes, breathing heavily as though sorting through painful memories. We were in a van sometimes. They took us places. But the place I ran from, I remember seeing a sign that said Oak something. Maybe Oakfield? Oakdale? Mark nodded encouragingly. Oakdale. That's a small industrial area on the outskirts of the city. There are warehouses with shipping trucks. Some even have an eagle symbol, I think. This could be it. Emily recognized that name from a local news report. Oakdale had a row of abandoned warehouses that were rumored to be used by unscrupulous businesses. If that was indeed the place, it could be where the traffickers were storing or moving children. That's something we can act on, Emily said. Mark took a steadying breath. I'll make some calls. But Emily, we'll need to keep this quiet. If Aldridge or anyone else gets wind that we're planning a raid, they might warn the traffickers. We don't know who's involved. Emily's thoughts whirled. Dr. Aldridge had told her in no uncertain terms to stay out of it. Could Dr. Aldridge somehow be connected to this? The possibility seemed unimaginable, but that ominous tone of hers still rang in Emily's ears. She decided not to mention that suspicion to Mark yet, not until she had more proof. They let the girl rest while Mark stepped out to gather more intel. A thunderstorm was still rolling in the distance, the skies overcast. Emily stared out the window, the gloom of the day reflecting the dread in her heart. So many unknowns hung in the air. She wanted to trust the system, to believe that once authorities recognized the gravity of the situation, they would descend on the traffickers and rescue the boy. But she had seen enough in her years as a nurse to know the system sometimes failed the most vulnerable. Later that evening, Emily took a short break to grab a bite from the hospital cafeteria. She sipped watery coffee, trying to quell her growing sense of despair. She recalled the first time she had encountered a trafficking victim, a teen girl from out of state, battered and left for dead in an alley. Emily had taken care of her, bridging the gap between hospital staff and the authorities. In the end, that girl survived, but the ring that had exploited her was never fully dismantled. Was it the same ring now? Was Dr. Aldridge's cold efficiency a front for something more sinister? Nurse Carter, came a voice behind her. She turned to see Dr. Aldridge standing there, arms folded. Emily was startled. The administrator rarely ventured to the cafeteria. "Busy day," the doctor continued, "though I see you finally took a moment to rest." Emily forced a neutral smile. "I needed a quick break. But I'm still on call for the child in pediatrics." Dr. Aldridge nodded slowly, her gaze penetrating. "I can appreciate your dedication. Just remember that the hospital's liability is a priority. We mustn't get entangled in matters best left to authorities, especially if there's no official record of wrongdoing." Emily's heart pounded. "I understand, doctor. But the child is clearly in crisis." "Yes, and we are providing her with the care she needs, medical attention, a social worker, and so on." Dr. Aldridge's voice lowered. "I hope you haven't been trying to dig around in matters that don't concern you. We wouldn't want to compromise the hospital's reputation." The thinly veiled threat made Emily's blood run cold. She attempted to keep her composure. "My only concern is her well-being." Dr. Aldridge gave a tight smile. "Good. Focus on that." With that, she turned and left. Emily sat there, the coffee now tasting like acid. There was something undeniably off about Dr. Aldridge's behavior. Most administrators would want to ensure the child's safety as a moral imperative, not just worry about the hospital's legal exposure. Emily felt convinced that the doctor knew more than she let on. That night, Emily barely slept. She dozed in a reclining chair near the pediatric ward, ensuring she was close if anything happened to the girl. Occasionally, she would check in. The child mostly slept fitfully, waking in cold sweats, looking around for reassurance. Each time, Emily was there, offering a gentle touch on her shoulder until she drifted off again. By morning, Mark called with an update. He had managed to gather enough pieces to justify a search in Oakdale. "We got a partial warrant," he explained over the phone. "It's not broad, but we have the right to inspect a specific warehouse that's been flagged for suspicious activity. A shipping company with an eagle symbol on the side. We're going in at dusk. I want you to keep the girl calm and safe until then, okay?" Emily pressed the phone to her ear. "Of course. She's in the pediatrics ward, room 211. I'm not letting her out of my sight. Just be careful, Ma. If these are dangerous traffickers, they won't hesitate to defend their turf." He promised he would. After hanging up, Emily felt a tremor of both relief and fear. At least there was movement. Soon, they might save the brother and any other children trapped there. But she was terrified that something could go wrong. If Dr. Aldridge was somehow connected, and Emily's gut said she was, could she tip them off before the raid? Throughout the day, Emily made sure the child was as comfortable as possible. She brought her meals, tried to engage her in conversation. Occasionally, she would gently ask if the girl remembered anything else about the place, especially a name or clue that might help pinpoint the boy's exact location. The child tried, but she often ended up distressed, burying her face in the stuffed rabbit. Emily stopped pressing, realizing it was doing more harm than good. In the late afternoon, Emily noticed something odd: a man in a custodial uniform lingering near the pediatric ward. She had never seen him before, and his uniform bore no hospital insignia. He avoided eye contact with the nurses and seemed to be scanning the corridor. When Emily spotted him, he turned abruptly and walked away. Her heart pounded. She hurried to the nearest security guard, explaining that an unauthorized individual might be prowling around the ward. The guard promised to check it out, but by the time Emily escorted him back to the hallway, the man was gone. Emily returned to the girl's room, shutting the door behind her. She locked eyes with the child, who looked unsettled. "Emily, I saw him too," the girl whispered. "He looked like one of the men who used to watch us." Emily's blood ran cold. "It's okay," she said, mustering calm. "He's gone now. But this means we have to be extra careful." She called Mark, voice shaking slightly. "There might have been an attempt to scout or recapture her. We need more security on this floor, Mark. Now." Mark cursed under his breath. "I'll get an officer I trust to come down there. Don't let that girl out of your sight." Minutes later, an off-duty cop who owed Mark a favor arrived and discreetly took position near the pediatric ward, while wearing civilian clothes. Emily felt a bit more secure, though her nerves were still on edge. The possibility that these criminals had infiltrated the hospital terrified her. What if Dr. Aldridge had provided them with access? Finally, night fell, and Mark texted Emily that the raid was imminent. She paced the hallway, occasionally poking her head into the girl's room to reassure her that they were making progress. Hours seemed to stretch like days. Every shadow made Emily jump. At around 10 p.m., the hush of the hospital grew heavy. Most visitors had cleared out. The overhead lights hummed. The quiet beep of monitors in other rooms was the only backdrop to Emily's pounding heart. Then, just as Emily was about to check on the child again, Dr. Aldridge appeared, stepping off the elevator. Her expression was unreadable. She beckoned Emily over to a side corridor. "Nurse Carter," she said quietly, "I need to speak with you." Emily braced herself, remembering the intangible threat from earlier. She followed the doctor, but kept her distance. "Yes." Dr. Aldridge folded her arms. "I've learned from reliable sources that Detective Evans and some of his colleagues are planning a break-in or search operation tonight. He has no authority to do that on behalf of this hospital." Emily's stomach clenched. "He's working on behalf of the police department, not the hospital. Why does that concern you, Dr. Aldridge?" The doctor's lips tightened into a grim line. "It concerns me because if this turns into a scandal, the hospital's reputation will suffer. And if you're implicated in helping him, well, I warned you about the consequences of stepping beyond your duties." Emily's nostrils flared. "We're talking about children's lives, doctor. If this is a child trafficking ring, they're hurting minors, selling them. How can you be more worried about the hospital's image?" Dr. Aldridge's face remained impassive. "The hospital is a pillar of this community, Ms. Carter. Without it, where would thousands of patients receive care? If a scandal topples our funding, we can't help anyone." Emily's voice shook with anger. "That is a cheap excuse. If children are suffering, we have a moral obligation to act." A sudden hardness replaced the doctor's polite veneer. She stepped closer, her voice almost a hiss. "I strongly advise you to stay in your lane, Nurse Carter. If you keep meddling, there will be consequences, ones that may extend far beyond your career." Emily's throat was tight. "Is that a threat?" Dr. Aldridge's gaze flicked away, and a moment of tension crackled in the air. Then she said, "Consider it a warning." She turned abruptly and strode down the hallway. Emily watched her go, her heart hammering. The threat was blatant now, and it left no doubt in her mind that Dr. Aldridge was involved in something nefarious. Determination flared inside her. She would not let the doctor intimidate her, not when a child's life was at stake. She hurried back to the pediatric ward, where the off-duty officer was stationed discreetly behind a corner, scanning the hallway. Emily went into the girl's room, finding the child curled up on the bed, hugging the rabbit. The bedside lamp cast a soft glow, but the girl still looked frightened. Emily sat next to her, brushing the hair from her face. "Mark's out there right now, trying to find Danny," she said quietly. The girl stared at her with wide eyes. "Emily, what if they hurt him before he can be rescued?" Emily swallowed, feeling a lump in her throat. "Mark's good at his job. He'll do everything in his power to keep Danny safe." She forced a reassuring smile, though inside she felt the weight of uncertainty. "You're safe here. I promise I won't let anyone take you." The hours dragged on. Midnight came and went without any word from Mark. Emily felt her anxiety spike, and every time her phone vibrated, she would rush to check it, only to find it was some unrelated hospital alert or a spam message. The child eventually drifted to sleep, though restlessly. Emily stood guard, sipping stale coffee to stay awake. Close to 2 a.m., her phone finally buzzed with a text from Mark. "We found him. Alive. We'll bring him in soon. More kids. It's big. Keep the girl safe." Relief swept through Emily so forcefully that she nearly sank to her knees. Tears pricked her eyes. They had found him. He was safe. She glanced at the sleeping girl, and her heart soared at the knowledge that her brother had been rescued. But the text also indicated that there were more children, which meant the trafficking ring was large, perhaps bigger than they initially imagined. And Mark's text pointed to the urgency of securing them all. Emily texted back, her hands trembling, "Thank God. I'm here, waiting." It wasn't until nearly 4 a.m. that Mark and a handful of uniformed officers arrived at the pediatric ward with a small group of frightened children in tow, including a boy who appeared about 8 years old, blinking in confusion. Emily recognized him at once from the slight resemblance to the girl. The same brown hair, same timid eyes. He looked around, uncertain, until Emily guided him gently into the room where the girl was still sleeping. "Danny," the boy whispered, though it sounded more like a question. He crept closer, his eyes darting over the sterile environment. Emily turned on the small lamp. The girl stirred, opened her eyes, and gasped. "Danny." She bolted upright. "Danny." She reached out, and the boy stumbled into her arms, tears streaming down both their faces. Emily felt her own eyes moisten. Even the hardened officers around them shifted uncomfortably, moved by the raw emotion in the room. "I'm sorry," the girl sobbed against her brother's shoulder. "I'm so sorry I left you behind." He just shook his head, clinging to her as if she were the only thing tethering him to reality. Emily glanced at Mark, who gave her a small, tired smile. He had blood on his knuckles and a bruise on his cheek, clear signs that the raid had met resistance. But the relief in his eyes spoke volumes. She nodded to him, silently conveying her gratitude. Mark told Emily he'd fill her in on the details soon. For now, the children needed medical checkups, and the newly rescued boy needed immediate attention. Emily guided him gently to a second bed in the room, coaxing him to sit so she could examine his injuries. He was malnourished and had bruises along his arms, but at least he was breathing, conscious, and safe. As dawn approached, Emily learned bits and pieces from Mark. They had targeted the correct warehouse in Oakdale, stumbling upon a grim holding area with cramped rooms and minimal facilities for the children. At least 4 other children besides Danny were found there, each bearing a numeric tattoo or brand. Some men were arrested on site, but others escaped, and Mark suspected the ring was more extensive. He had also heard that Dr. Aldridge's name might be tied to some falsified medical documentation found in an office on the premises. Mark had to verify the authenticity, but it was a strong lead that suggested the hospital administrator had played a key part in the operation. Emily barely found time to process the revelation before Dr. Aldridge swept onto the scene, eyes blazing with fury at the presence of uniformed officers in the pediatric ward. She demanded an explanation. Mark refused to divulge any details beyond the fact that they were caring for rescued children. When Dr. Aldridge tried to pry further, Mark quietly informed her that he had a warrant to question certain hospital staff regarding suspicious records. The look on Dr. Aldridge's face shifted from outrage to thinly veiled panic. She spat, "You have no right to barge in here." Mark lifted an eyebrow. "Actually, I do. We have reason to believe some official hospital documentation was used illegally. We're collecting evidence now." Emily stood behind Mark, her hands cold with tension. She was certain that if Dr. Aldridge was part of the trafficking ring, she would either attempt to flee or destroy evidence. The next few hours were chaos. The children had to be processed by social services, the police needed statements, medical staff scrambled to deal with the sudden influx of traumatized minors, and Dr. Aldridge was nowhere to be seen. She had slipped away into the labyrinth of the hospital offices, presumably to gather or destroy anything that might incriminate her. It was mid-morning when Mark finally located her. She was in her private office, hastily packing files into a leather briefcase. 2 uniformed officers accompanied Mark, stepping in just as Dr. Aldridge tried to slip out a side door. "Dr. Aldridge," Mark said, "we need to ask you a few questions about some documents that appear to link you to a series of foster child records. Records that suspiciously disappeared from official government databases." She clutched the briefcase to her chest, her face pale but defiant. "This is ridiculous. I have no idea what you're talking about." Mark signaled to one of the officers, who gently but firmly took the briefcase. "We have a warrant to seize any files in your possession that could relate to the missing children." He opened the briefcase and rifled through the thick stack of papers. His eyes hardened. These appeared to be medical transfer forms for foster children, dated over several years. Many are not signed or authorized by any legitimate agency. Dr. Aldridge's composure cracked. "It's not what it looks like. I was just..." Mark lifted a single page, reading it aloud in a grim tone. Patient 407, transferred at request of caretaker. No official record. Must remain confidential. This is your signature at the bottom, doctor. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling with anger. Do you realize the position you're putting this hospital in? I was acting in the best interest of children who had nowhere else to go, but you bureaucrats always. Mark cut her off. We found children in a warehouse, neglected and awaiting illegal transport. Some of the forms indicate they came through your watch. That suggests you're more than just complicit. You were orchestrating it. Dr. Aldridge's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. You can't prove anything. I want a lawyer. She tried to sweep past them, but the officers blocked the way. You'll have the right to legal counsel, Mark said, motioning for the officer to escort her out. We'll see what the courts say. Word spread quickly through the hospital that Dr. Aldridge had been taken into custody on suspicion of facilitating child trafficking. Emily felt a mixture of relief and shock. The woman who had walked these halls, presenting herself as a champion of hospital standards, was allegedly a mastermind behind one of the most reprehensible crimes imaginable. Staff whispered in dismay, reeling from the betrayal. Some refused to believe it, claiming there must be a mistake. Others admitted that Dr. Aldridge had always been cold, disconnected from the real moral ethos of caregiving. The entire day was a blur for Emily as she helped Mark and the authorities document the two siblings' injuries, statement, and emotional condition. The other rescued children were placed in safe houses, but the girl and her brother specifically clung to each other, and the girl clung to Emily. Mark approached Emily quietly in the corridor that afternoon, his eyes reflecting exhaustion. These two trust you, he said. And I trust you. Could you stay on as a liaison of sorts? Keep them calm while we finalize everything? Emily nodded, her heart brimming with concern for the children. She felt she had no choice. Even if it meant more sleepless nights, she couldn't turn her back on them. She wanted to ensure they had a stable future, far from the clutches of predators. Days turned into weeks as the legal process churned forward. Dr. Aldridge faced charges of conspiracy, fraud, and child trafficking. More evidence surfaced, showing that she had systematically removed problematic foster children from the official system, forging paperwork that claimed they had been transferred out of state or reunited with biological relatives. In reality, she sold them to international traffickers, making a fortune in the process. Several high-ranking officials were also implicated for accepting bribes or ignoring red flags. Meanwhile, the girl and Danny struggled with nightmares, flashbacks, and the lingering terror that someone would come for them again. Social services tried to place them in a temporary foster home, but the siblings refused to be separated from Emily. Late one evening, Emily found herself in a small interview room with Mark, the siblings, and a social worker. The children wept at the mere idea of being placed with strangers. The social worker frowned, explaining that the system needed to follow procedures. Mark, who had grown close to the siblings through the rescue operation, exchanged a look with Emily. He took a deep breath and said, "What if I take them?" Emily blinked. You mean foster them?" Mark nodded. "I've been looking into it. I have a stable job, a house with extra rooms. I can handle the process if the state will allow it. These kids deserve someone who cares, who won't let them fall through the cracks again." The siblings, overhearing, looked at Mark with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't realized Mark was considering such a big step, but it made sense. He had grown protective of them, and they had come to trust him. Over the following days, Mark navigated the labyrinth of paperwork, background checks, and assessments. The children's mental health counselors agreed that stability with a known protector would aid their recovery. Emily visited Mark's home a few times to help the children settle in. At first, they were jumpy, startled by unfamiliar creaks or the hum of an air conditioner. But gradually, they began to reclaim fragments of childhood. The girl introduced herself one evening with a name she thought might have once been hers, Sophie. Danny, quiet as ever, simply stuck close to her side. Throughout the lengthy investigations, Emily saw them frequently, checking on their progress. The final blow to Dr. Aldridge's operation came when more victims stepped forward, telling harrowing stories that matched the siblings' accounts. In time, the ring was dismantled, arrests were made, and Dr. Aldridge's carefully orchestrated empire of documents collapsed under the scrutiny of the law. Finally, on a bright, crisp morning, the siblings, Sophie and Danny, stood in a courthouse corridor beside Mark. Emily was there too, her heart pounding. She wore a modest dress and had taken time off from the hospital to witness the hearing that would finalize Mark's adoption of the two children. They each clung to Mark's hands nervously, but he reassured them with a warm smile. The hearing itself was a quiet affair, with a family court judge and a few social workers in attendance. Documents were signed, and the judge, looking over his reading glasses, said, "Congratulations, Mr. Evans. I hereby finalize the adoption." Sophie sniffled, tears of joy streaking her cheeks. Danny clutched a small airplane toy in one hand, a gift from Mark, while his other hand remained firmly in his sister's grasp. Emily dabbed at her eyes. She couldn't recall the last time she had witnessed such a moment of pure relief and triumph. When they left the courthouse, the siblings looked a bit stunned, as though the idea of truly belonging to someone, of being safe, was still sinking in. But the trust they had built with Mark was palpable, and Emily felt certain they were on a path to healing. They had survived something unspeakably dark, yet here they stood, embraced by a loving guardian who would make sure they never returned to that hellish world. Over the next few months, Emily remained close to the family, visiting on weekends. She saw how Sophie's nightmares gradually lessened, though the scars of her ordeal would take a long time to fade. Danny was still quiet, but he grew bolder each day, daring to speak up about his preferences, like wanting chocolate ice cream or enjoying a superhero cartoon. Mark accommodated their every need, from therapy sessions to bedtime routines that included reading them stories, something they had never experienced before. The hospital slowly adapted to a new normal after Dr. Aldridge's arrest. A temporary administrator stepped in, determined to restore trust and transparency. Emily felt a weight lift, knowing that the place she dedicated her life to was no longer secretly complicit in a monstrous operation. She also received a commendation from local authorities for her role in exposing the trafficking ring, though the media attention made her uncomfortable. All she had ever wanted was to do right by her patients. One day, months after the rescue, Emily dropped by Mark's house to deliver a gift: 2 plush rabbits for Sophie and Danny, each with a small airplane embroidered on one ear, a nod to Danny's love of flight and Sophie's beloved stuffed rabbit. The children greeted her excitedly, pulling her into their cozy living room. Artwork covered the fridge, childlike drawings of houses, sunshine, and hearts. The siblings' names were scrawled in bright crayons, as though they were claiming their space in the world for the first time. Sophie curled up beside Emily on the couch. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" she asked in a quiet voice. Emily smiled, stroking the girl's hair. "I hoped so with all my heart. I'm so proud of both of you." Danny climbed into Mark's lap, fiddling with the small airplane toy. "Next year, can we get on a real plane?" he asked, peering up at Mark with wide eyes. Mark laughed, though tears shone in his own. "Someday soon, buddy. Anywhere you want to go." Sophie whispered, "Maybe somewhere with a beach. I've never seen the ocean before." Emily felt a lump in her throat as she imagined these children, once locked away in a dingy warehouse, now dreaming of sunny beaches and family vacations. Their future finally seemed open, unbound by fear. Outside the living room window, golden afternoon light streamed in, illuminating the new family in a gentle glow. In the aftermath of the legal battles, Dr. Aldridge faced a lengthy prison sentence, with more charges piling on once additional evidence surfaced. The media called it one of the most egregious child trafficking cases in the region's history. The hospital, shaken to its core, implemented sweeping reforms to ensure that no staff member could ever again manipulate records so heinously. Donations and public sympathy poured in for programs aimed at preventing child exploitation and supporting foster children. Though the scars remained, both in the children's memories and in the hospital's tarnished reputation, there was a renewed commitment to vigilance and care. Sophie and Danny continued therapy sessions but also embraced normal childhood experiences, from attending a local school to joining weekend soccer games at the park. Mark relished fatherhood, throwing himself wholeheartedly into the role. Emily joined them for birthdays and holidays, forging bonds that felt like family. She saw the children's eyes sparkle with the promise of a life no longer overshadowed by abuse. On a warm spring day, exactly a year after the harrowing night Sophie arrived at the hospital, Emily helped them celebrate their family day, the anniversary of their official adoption. Balloons decorated Mark's backyard, and a small group of friends and supporters mingled. Sophie and Danny wore matching t-shirts with rabbits and airplanes, grinning from ear to ear. They ran around playing tag with the neighborhood kids, giggling without a care in the world. At one point, Sophie tugged at Emily's sleeve. "Look," she exclaimed, pointing to a rabbit bounding across the grass. Someone's pet had gotten loose from next door. They laughed as it hopped around, eventually letting them pet it. For Sophie, it seemed like a magical omen, a testament to how far they had come from the terror of that coded tattoo and captivity. In the quiet moments after the party, Emily found herself alone with Mark, cleaning up paper plates and deflated balloons. She glanced around at the normalcy of it all, children's laughter echoing, the smell of grilled hot dogs from a neighbor's yard, the faint hum of insects in the evening air. This was what they had fought for, the simple right of two children to enjoy an unremarkable day, free from fear. Mark leaned on the fence, watching Sophie and Danny chase each other around. "Hard to believe they're the same kids who were so scared to even look out a window," he said softly. Emily nodded. "They're resilient, but it's because they finally have the love and security they deserve." He offered a small smile. "I never saw myself as a father, you know. Especially not single father to two foster kids with a traumatic past. But I wouldn't trade it for anything now." Emily returned his smile. "They're lucky to have you." The siblings raced over then, breathless and laughing. "Daddy! Emily! Come play!" Danny insisted, eyes shining. Mark laughed and let Danny drag him into an improvised game of tag. Sophie grabbed Emily's hand, giggling. And so they ran together across the lawn, hearts full, shadows stretching long in the golden light of dusk. Although the memory of that dark night in the hospital would never fully vanish, nor the crimes committed by those who had exploited children, Sophie and Danny had a future. With each passing day, they gained confidence, overcame nightmares, and discovered the joys of a normal life. Their story became less about the horrors they had endured and more about the love that had saved them. And for Emily, who had once cradled a trembling girl in a triage bed, the sight of Sophie laughing under the sun was proof that hope could sprout in even the darkest soil. In the end, justice prevailed. Dr. Aldridge and her co-conspirators were dismantled and put behind bars, ensuring no more children under their influence would slip into the shadows. The hospital emerged humbled but determined never to let such treachery take root again. Mark, Sophie, and Danny built new routines, forging memories that overshadowed their past. And Emily, never forgetting that fateful night, continued her work as a nurse, quietly championing the vulnerable who walked through the hospital's doors. Life was far from perfect, but for those who had been wronged, it finally felt safe. Sophie kept her stuffed rabbit, the worn edges a reminder of where she had come from, but also a testament to the warmth and love that had carried her out of that place. Danny collected model airplanes, plastering his room with posters of destinations he hoped to see someday. Mark tucked them in each night with a gentle kiss on the forehead, promising that tomorrow would bring them even closer to their dreams. On the anniversary of their adoption, after the party had faded and the children slept soundly in their rooms, Emily bid Mark goodnight. Before leaving, she quietly peeked in on Sophie and Danny. They slept peacefully, arms draped across pillows and stuffed toys, safe beneath a nightlight that cast a soft glow on the walls. For a moment, Emily remembered the terrified girl in the hospital lobby, barefoot and clutching a rabbit, whispering, "They have my brother." How far they had all traveled from that moment. How courage, perseverance, and a commitment to truth had paved the way for healing. Emily closed the door gently, heart brimming with gratitude. She knew that in a world rife with cruelty, sometimes it took ordinary people making extraordinary choices to safeguard hope. And that was exactly what they had done. Thank you for watching until the end of this story. If you believe that standing up for the vulnerable is worth it every time, be sure to like and subscribe for more. We appreciate your time, and we'll see you again soon.